And we are live. What's good? It's your man DL Saints. It is Tuesday, and we gonna talk about some history. It is, like I said, all these bubbles I'll roll in, y'all. And thanks, first of all, thanks for coming. This is the DL Saint I Really Want to Know podcast. Um, Today we're gonna be talking history. We're gonna be talking ancient Egyptian history. And we're going to be talking about the Nubians and the 25th dynasty of Egypt, which is something that I'm fortunate enough to have a real close friend who knows all about this, highly educated, not only academically, but worldly. So everything we're going to talk about today, this part of the world, my dude has been there and checked it out. And I like to learn from people who have had their hands on. And we had my brother Rook on here. We have an episode we did a month or so ago. It was The Most Interesting Person I Know is the title of the episode. Go check it out. It's when I was just introducing Rook to the podcast world. And I thought it went really well, especially for my channel, because I'm a young channel. I'm growing. Wook hit me up and it's like, hey, man, let's talk about the Nubians. And here's the thing, like, you would think that I would just know everything there is to know about the Nubians, having gone to school, having living in a free world where education is not necessarily free, but it's free to a point. But I'd never heard of the Nubians. It's always like those brothers on the street that would talk about the Nubians, and then the world makes it look like there are crackpots out there saying that the original Egyptians were black, and they try to paint these people into a weird, space or whatever, when they're just telling the truth. And Rook is gonna break it down today. He's here. He's gonna break down the Nubians. And I've been online looking, and I'm like, wow, why is it we didn't get taught these things in school? Like, this is important. Brother Jason, I see you. What's good? What's good? Yeah, we gonna get this week started off pretty good, man. Like last night, I was on late last night with my dude Valor, man. We were talking some real geeky stuff, yo. We were getting into it real with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Disney, the Star Wars story. We talked a little bit of Marvel, so y'all go check that out if you want to see it. Like I said before, man, I'm trying to keep this thing all over the place. I want to talk to people from every bubble that I can think of that I have touched, and some bubbles that I haven't touched, because I really want to know. Hence the name of the show. I want to know these things. So the Nubians. And we're gonna learn about Kush, and we're gonna learn about all this stuff. And I'm looking forward to it. Rook is setting up right now, so we'll let him do that. And there was tons of videos out there. I mean, in this, like the hieroglyphs that are out there that depict these things. It's history, man. It blows my mind that we just don't, tell history the way it is. It's why are we trying to hide things? It seems like we're trying to hide things, or we're trying to forget things, or we're trying to overlook things. I mean, I don't understand that. I really don't. I don't understand that. So, I mean, like, check out this hieroglyph right here. Like, check this stuff out. The Nubians. This is off the walls. This is out of Egypt. Bro. You don't think that would have caught my attention if I was a fifth grader looking at that? Like, man, look at this. It would definitely catch my attention. Like, yo, they look like me. You know what I mean? The only depictions I saw in history class, especially ancient history, well, we didn't really talk about ancient history, but the only thing I saw in history class were black folks who looked like slaves, which, that it is what it is. That's part of history, but there were also pharaohs, the original kings and queens of this planet. So yeah, we're gonna get into it. It looks like my dude is ready. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rook, the man, the myth, the legend.
I was trying to set up my desk in front of the window because I couldn't find my ring light.
But the light's perfect right there, bro.
Yeah, I got the natural light coming in. So now I'm eating my breakfast.
Hey man, I ain't mad at you. Wook's on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast, man. So we got all kind of times things jumping off. But you know, my brother was nice enough. Like, yeah, man, anytime you want, I'll get up and tell you all about this, man. So, and I get all my knowledge from Rook, man. When it comes to womanizing, me and him, we compare notes on that. When it comes to weapons, we compare our notes on that. And now history, he's gonna teach me and by default teach anyone who's watching about the Nubians, man. So brother, how do we kick this off, man? What do I need to know Nubian 101?
Well, first off, anytime you see a documentary or anything on Egypt, you're watching a documentary on the Nubians as well. The two cultures are so integrated that it's kind of a disservice to talk about one without talking about the other. And we're not talking about like 25th dynasty necessarily. That was the third intermediate period of Egypt. We're going all the way back to pre-dynastic times. I mean, if we go back that far, in Nubia, there was a culture group. They just call them the A group to show you how uninventive they are with coming up with names when it comes to Nubia. But there was they call it an A group culture. This is like 8,000 years ago. This is way, way back. They lived along the Nile. And we got to get out of the headset of or the mindset of thinking in terms of nations and borders and all this stuff, right? We got to look at the Nile as a living thing that cuts through northwest or northeast Africa, right? And when you have that kind of fresh water source in that region, you're going to have all kinds of culture groups living along the Nile. The Nile was, the lifeblood of that region of the world.
So
And there
without the
were
now,
no
that
there were
those
no
people would have been
borders
there.
or anything. It wasn't like here's Egypt, here's Nubia, here's whatever else, the land of Punt, all this stuff. It was kind of just there's a lot of intermingling, if you will, And uh, here, hold on, let me turn up my microphone because I barely hear you.
Oh,
I got
okay.
I got a shitty laptop.
I ain't mad
Um,
at you. So the
all right,
lifeblood, the Nile being a lifeblood, and because of that, all of the humans who need water to survive, right? Because
they're gonna all be
how
there. They're
yeah,
gonna
how
all
long
be
can you
there.
live? How long can you live without water?
Yeah. What is it? 3 days? I
Three
don't know.
days. It's
I
like
mean,
yeah.
I can't live without water for 3 hours. I gotta have it. uh, but so, you know, let's look at the geology of the region. Like, I'm not going to turn this into a geology course or anything. But if you go back to the Eocene, which is like, millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of years ago, that part of the world was under an ancient sea. I forget the name of the sea, the Tyrrhenian Sea or what. It doesn't matter. It's a modern name to a sea that didn't have a name. But Egypt was under a shallow sea. Maybe you can find it online. You can show someone a picture. I think it was called the Tyrrhenian Sea, or just look up the Eocene. Look at an Eocene map of the world, and you'll find an image on uh, DuckDuckGo, or if people use Google, use Google. um, but anyway, what this meant was all the sea creatures, the shell-bearing sea creatures, that had shells. Those shells are made out of something called calcium carbonate. And I know it sounds technical, but bear with me. When those creatures died over the millions of years, that would go down and settle at the bottom of that shallow sea, which was Egypt at the time, parts of Libya and stuff like that, right? So, but what that did over time is with time and pressure, that created what's called limestone. Okay. Now, limestone, the Nile could cut through limestone very easily, and it gives you this really nice, shallow channels or embankments on the side of the Nile, so it could flood out, and you have these really vast, nice, lush alluvial floodplains. Because the Nile, as you know, inundates that land annually, or it did before the Aswan High Dam was put in um, by Gamal Abdel Nasser, an Egyptian president from the mid 20th century. We'll talk about that too, because that dam has submerged uh, thousands of miles of Nubian land that was never excavated, and it's now lost to history forever. We'll get to that. But anyway, so Egypt was kind of blessed geologically in this sense, because this limestone that was basically the result of this ancient Eocene sea has allowed for that land to be as rich as it is, because the Nile has a nice, much wider bank, shallower embankment, so the flooding was more widespread. And that spreads all that rich alluvium, nutrient-rich soils that comes up from sub-Saharan Africa, and so they have these really nice agricultural land available to them. When you get down into like Upper Nubia, so the Nile flows from south to north. So you always refer to what's upstream as upper and what's
Okay.
downstream lower. So the further south you go, you got Upper Nubia, Lower Nubia, Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, and then the Delta, and then you're in the Mediterranean Sea. Well, Nubia, ancient Nubia, or today what's Sudan and parts of Ethiopia, and perhaps even some other areas like Eritrea. But I think Eritrea was the land of Punt. I also actually think the land of Punt included across the Red Sea. I think it also included uh, what's modern day Yemen. But maybe we'll talk about that later or something if you want. That's another really fascinating African culture. But getting back to the geology, because there was no sea, there's no limestone. So the Nile has to cut through sandstone, which is still a soft sedimentary rock, but it kind of confines the Nile. So the Nubians didn't quite have the same luxury of having these vast fertile plains. They did have vast fertile plains, like between the confluence of the White and Blue Nile. When they come together, this area here is
Hmm.
a very fertile plain that the Nubians uh, utilized. So the Nubians really had to supplement agriculture and continue to hunt and gather and all these things. But what it did was it made them extraordinarily. I mean, they were elite bowmen, probably of the entire world. The only other bowmen I can think of are the horseback riders of Scythia or the Mongols, that kind of stuff. But we're talking like, so when we talk about Nubia, I got to make it clear is there was a lot of groups in Nubia. There was the Medjay, for instance, in the Eastern Desert. Um, and they were so well known, world renowned in the ancient world for their bowmanship, that the Egyptians hired them to fight alongside them in battles. A lot of the battles were probably that the Egyptians won could not have been won without these Nubian warriors. I think if you go online, you can Google Nubian wooden warrior statues. You'll see there they are right there. I'm pointing at it like you can see what I'm pointing at. But see those pictures of those guys holding bows? Those are
Yes.
wooden statues that they found. Those might have been Medjay warriors from the Eastern Desert. And it was very common for Egypt to hire these guys to help fight these battles. I mean, there was a lot of different groups. There was an area in Nubia called Wawat, and there was Urjet, and Setju, and Yam, the Medjay here. So we got a lot of different groups. Sometimes Nubians fought Nubians. It's just like how it is, throughout ancient history. Like I was saying, the point of all this really is that Nubia didn't have it as easy in terms of the agriculture and everything. But I think this is what set the stage for their culture being so unique, you know. And like I was saying, we're going way, way back to this A group, which I can't believe they can't come up with a better name than A group. The
It's
next one
locked
was
in.
B. The next one was B group. Then they had a C group, but the B group, as it turns out, they thought there was a B group, but it actually turned out that this A group was just a impoverished version of the A group. So there is actually no B group. So now it just goes from A group to C group with their imaginative names for these ancient Nubian cultures. But this A group, we're going back pre-dynastic Egypt. We're a unique culture group that just abruptly disappeared. They just disappeared off the archaeological map. But the timing of their disappearance, coincidentally or not, I think it had something to do with this. But I think it coincided with the same time that Narmer, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty of Egypt, united Egypt. when he united Upper and Lower Egypt, suddenly this A group disappeared, which leads me to believe that they probably occupied Upper Egypt as well as what's called Lower Nubia. And they probably, you know, they say they just disappeared off the map, but you know what? I think they were absorbed into Egyptian society. So right off the bat, you're going to have Black Egyptians right from the start. And the other thing I want to make clear too is that Egypt and Nubia weren't like the rest of the world at the time, like Mesopotamia and especially the Greeks later on, the Romans. Um, you know, if you wanted to get married, you can get married with whoever you wanted. You got married out of love. There are poems in Egypt, and I would surmise that there was probably oral traditions in Nubia because Nubians were pre-literate. I want to make that clear too. I often hear that the Nubians were illiterate, and that's just not doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical. If you don't have a writing system yet, how can you be illiterate? You know,
Right. It
you don't
doesn't
have a
exist.
right. You are pre-literate. The
So,
Nubian,
and let me stop you right there. Right. Do you think those little hits are designed by our culture today to
well,
subjugate?
you can be more specific. Our culture was the white males of the 19th and early 20th and mid 20th century. Nobody's trying to hide that fact. It's very obvious. If you look at some of the older scholarship and the way they wrote things, it's actually pretty. It's kind of it's as cringy as some of the old Disney movies from the 50s. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I've read so much of it. I was like, damn. I mean, can you be
So
more
this was
obvious?
this was a way to kind of keep us being people of color in their place and say, well, you don't really have a spot in history. And what's good, Miss AK Lady? Thanks for joining. I see you out there. And Ben 10, what's happening? Welcome. I hope y'all got y'all number 2 pencils and some paper, man, because we about to get deep into this. But because at the top of the show I was talking, you know, I'm looking at the Bowmans right here, right? I pulled up the picture that we had up a second ago, and it's just all these black warriors, you know, like I never saw these before, ever. I saw the terracotta soldiers. I saw what was going on in Asia, but I never
What does that
saw
tell you
this.
though? If you watch History Channel, how many documentaries do they have on Nubia? I mean, I don't watch the History Channel because it's not really history. It's kind of
I,
nonsense. But
yeah,
I mean, when you hear people talk about Egypt, I never once hear Nubia mentioned, and
nope.
I don't hear anything about the Black Pharaohs. I mean, look, it's not just the 25th dynasty that had the Black Pharaohs. Okay, um, what was his name? It was Mentu. What was it? Mentuhotep II. He was an 11th dynasty. He was the 6th ruler of the 11th dynasty. The 11th dynasty, not the 25th. We're going way back. He was Nubian descent, and all scholars agree on that. I don't never hear that talked about. I only hear about 25th dynasty, the Nubian dynasty, and that was it. They were in, and they were forced out by the Neo-Assyrian Empire under Ashurbanipal, which we could talk about later. But no, it's not true at all. Like I was saying on that point I was making earlier about marrying for love, you could pick whoever you want. You know, if you go into Mesopotamia or Greek or Roman, all these other cultures, they were all arranged by the father of the family. And but in Egypt, Nubia, you can marry who you want. There was a lot of intermarriages, intermingling with people. You're going to have people of Nubian descent in Egypt, and you're going to have people of Egyptian descent in Nubia. Um, and you know, this kind of stuff is to talk about Egyptians without talking about Nubians. Again, like I was saying, is you have to include both because they're both so uh, related. You know, they're both so related. And yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to pull up a picture here on, so you have to bear with me here because I see you have a picture there. I think I
You got a
got
better
that.
one? Yeah, I'm gonna pull this one down, and
Yeah,
then
I'm yeah, go ahead and talk while I find this thing.
I
I
ain't mad at you, Miss Globe
mean,
Girl.
he's
Welcome, Miss Globe Girl. Welcome to the stream. How you doing, Brother Roman? How you doing? Welcome. Yeah, we got Rook here that's gonna break down uh the Nubians and what's going on with ancient Egyptian history, which right off rip, Rook was telling us the way that we were taught by about the Egyptians, and I mean we people in America, the way I was taught. No, I never heard the term Nubian ever in school, ever. Never heard the term. I did hear Egyptians. I did hear about Tut. I did hear about Nefertiti. Right. I did hear about Ramses. Right. I did watch. I watched Moses. I watched the white people act like the Egyptians on in the movies. Right. But and
Hey,
it
by
just
the way, the Nubians helped the Hebrews fight in a battle against the Assyrians. It's actually mentioned in the Bible in one of the was one of the Hebrew texts. It was man, trying to think of all this at once. It was what was the king's name? Anyway, Nubians are intertwined in a lot of different things. They're mentioned in the Bible. They're mentioned in Hebrew texts. They fought battles alongside the Hebrews to fend off the Assyrians. This is all stuff I never hear taught about, but it's all real stuff and it's out there, you know.
so I mean, and again, I guess my original question stands, man. Was this
I
a
can't find the
deliberate?
picture.
That's all cool. Was this a deliberate attempt to kind of
Well, we can
whitewash
only
history or no?
we can only speculate, but I think it doesn't take a genius to figure things out. But when you look at things for what they are, I mean, look, let me put it to you this way. Let's say I had knowledge of something. Let's say I was like, hey man, you know what? This car has this, that, and the other about it or whatever. But I withhold
Let's
some
say that you
information,
have a
some
spaceship.
critical information about the car, and you jump in the car and crash.
Let's say you got a spaceship. Like you got a spaceship,
Yeah.
right? But you don't want me and my crew to know about the spaceship. So you would kind of, you know what? Spaceships don't exist. I don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's the information's out there now, especially with the internet. But the problem is it's not always easy to find because it's hard to where do you start? You put in Nubians, and the first thing you're going to get is going to be a whole bunch of you know blogs and this and that and this and the other, but they all kind of regurgitate what each other say. For instance, uh, beer was invented in Egypt. Uh, but was it because the Nubians created beer? And there was a 2010 study that showed that they used a bacteria. I don't remember what it's called, like streptomyces or something. Anyway, this bacteria creates a chemical called a tetracycline, and it's an antibiotic. And this study looked at bones of Nubian bones, the skeletal remains, and they did whatever analysis that they do on bones, the genetic whatever, and they found really high levels of this tetracycline in their bones, like too high to just be a fluke. And the current scholarship is current. I mean, they're debating, but it seems like the Nubians were purposely making beer with this antibiotic property to it. If you think about, this part of the world, and then just in those ancient times, there weren't like water filters and stuff, all kinds of stuff floating around the water, and things that don't, they might seem funny to us now, but diarrhea could kill. It's a very
yes.
serious problem even to this day in sub-Saharan Africa.
But dude,
And
I give you a story on that, man. When I got deployed to Desert Storm, and this is back in the '90s, we almost lost a soldier to dysentery. He almost,
yeah,
pooped
it's
himself to death. We found him he was in a latrine. Like, dude, we had to get in there and, get some IVs in him and get him out of there and get him some help, or he would have died.
yeah, and they didn't have all that back then, obviously. So if this is the case, it'd be one of the first times antibiotics were used, long before the Nobel Prize winner, with penicillin, and what was that in the 20th century,
So,
thousands of years before that. It's not like the Nubians were the first to use something that had an antibiotic property. I think the Egyptians did something like that with their bread and stuff like that, but it's all in this same part of the world.
which kind of makes sense. You said you couldn't have one without the other. So if they had this knowledge, you would think it would cross pollinate.
Yeah. So I mean, but think about that. You can figure. Can you imagine figuring something like that out? Like, just shows you like how much we don't know about Nubian culture. I mean, that this was a 2010 study. So what was that, 12 years ago? It's very recent.
Wow.
Um,
Well, you said that
and
the study itself is only what, 25 years?
it was 2010. I don't remember the author, but it was really fascinating because that would be one of the oldest instances of sorry,
I'll go.
be
It's
one of
good,
the
bro.
oldest instances of purposeful use of an antibiotic.
Man, I
You
gotta look
know,
that up, man, because I know there's an article out there somewhere, man. I see. I learned right there, right there. See what y'all learning, people. That's why you got to come over here, man. We all over the place over here on our Really Want to Know podcast. Jay Swans, what's good, brother? He clowning because I'm wearing my Hong Kong Fooey shirt. Yeah, bro. Yeah. Hong-
I was talking about your shirts last night.
you
I was
sure
like, every
was.
time I watch your show, you got like a new nerd shirt on.
That's it, man. Hong Kong Fooey, bro.
And I
He was.
love it, man. I think it's awesome.
I'm gonna keep rocking it, man. And then brother Jason was like a couple poop emojis, like, "Oh my god, yeah, man, that's how war goes down, man." You be surprised how many people die from that sort of thing, dysentery or getting some nasty infection, and we're just out
Yeah.
in the middle of nowhere. We can't get penicillin or whatever. But to know that this ancient group of people discovered the properties of penicillin, or
Well, that
yeah,
wasn't penicillin, but yeah, it was tetracycline. But it shows you. I mean, come on, they figured that out. I mean, it's real obvious. It's so pronounced in the bones of these Nubians that it wasn't a fluke. It was
yeah,
something they were doing. It very likely were doing purposely. They saw that, hey, you know what? When we drink this, it's not necessarily that they knew it was tetracycline, but they saw the effects. They're like, hey, you know what? When we drink this beer, and remember, the beer back then wasn't like beer today gets you sloshed. Not that beer today really gets you sloshed, but
right.
I mean, it
Well,
was like a really low alcohol content. But the other thing with beer is that alcohol content also helped purify the beer. So it was actually safer a lot to drink beer than it was to drink straight out of the Nile.
and to drink water, and that carried on into Europe. I know that people would give you beer, like like turn of the century kind of stuff, and like the UK, for instance, they would drink beer
Yeah.
before they drink water because the water was so bad. Miss Globe Girl has a question for you, brother. So, what made the guest interested in Nubian existence and culture?
Oh, that's your question.
The guest,
Your
no,
guess, right?
yeah,
Is
you,
that's
she's
what
talking
makes
about
your
you.
Oh, what made me interested?
Yes, because you're the guest.
I
Yes.
teach ancient history at a community college here in Los Angeles. Um, so I covered the Nubians, the Egyptians, the Minoans, the Scythians, Mesopotamians, Assyrians, all that stuff. So, but Nubia is just part of that ancient world. They're integral to that
And,
ancient world. You
and you
know,
know,
there's so much that we don't know about. I mean, pull up an image of the Shabaka stone. It's called Shabaka stone, Shabaka stone. You'll find it right away. Just put that up there and I'll talk about it for a second. There's another thing we don't know. A lot of people don't know that I find fascinating. Like we just talked about this beer, which may be one of the first instances of a purposeful use of an antibiotic. So this stone doesn't look like much, right? And that's because sometime after the Nubians were, gone, and it was still in ancient history to us. Someone found it and used it as a millstone to make, to grind grains for bread. So unfortunately, a lot of the Meroitic inscriptions that were on it, which is a Nubian script, are gone, but they have been able to decipher a lot of it. And what it is actually Shabaka or Shabako. You can call him either, who was a Nubian 25th dynasty pharaoh of Egypt and Nubia, all of it. Um, this was what it is it was a copy of a scroll that he found in a temple of Amun. And what he did was he copied it onto this stone, which of course it's really damaged now because someone was using it to make bread.
it's crazy, man.
Yeah, I mean, come on. But the thing is that the style of writing that scholars have interpreted would date all the way back to the Old Kingdom. And if so, and the most scholars think this is true, then what you're looking at is the oldest written record of human thought uh, known to mankind, right there on
Wow,
that Tabaka stone. And that would be
wow,
a copy of it, but you're still looking at the oldest written record, likely, very likely.
bro.
And that's something else. How many people knew that?
I didn't, and you know what? I got so excited to jump on here and do this that I forgot to have you introduce yourself to everybody. So let's take a
Uh,
moment and let you.
there's nothing to introduce. My name's Rook. Uh, I have my master's degree in cultural history, and uh, I teach online right now, online courses in ancient cultures. I also teach environmental science. I have a blog online, but I think I'm a dinosaur because I don't think anyone reads blogs anymore. I think I have to do vlogs, but I'm not skilled enough to be able to do all that video editing and stuff. I like world traveling. I'm a professional storm chaser. I'm actually leading a tour the week after next. Um, yeah, I don't know what else.
I mean,
No,
you just like you like the what's the way to give everybody a quick example of how you travel? Like you're going to Greece pretty soon. What
yeah, I'm
where
heading to
were
Naxos.
so
Um,
where will you be laying your head, so to speak, once you get there? Like how do you get down?
what I do is usually I find somewhere I'm interested in seeing, usually something that has an ancient site that I have not seen yet that I'm really interested in. Say, like for example, Meroe in Sudan, in northern Sudan, which is we could talk about that. That's where all the Nubian pyramids, a lot of them are there. Um, and I'll think about it, but I found the best way to travel is to just, if you want to see a place, buy the ticket first and worry about logistics later. Because you'll find as soon as you have a ticket in your hand, you're now so focused on figuring out logistics, what you want to see, and this and that. You're no longer pondering, oh, I don't want to buy the ticket until I'm absolutely sure where I go. How do I get this bus to go here? Or, this, that, and the other. Just get the ticket first. So that's how I travel. And I always show up to a place, but I know where, what I'm going to be looking at. I don't just show up completely naive. I try to understand the sites that I'm going to be looking at and stuff. But once I get there, I'm out on foot, huffing up down trails, looking for ancient sites. A couple summers ago, I was on the island of Syros, and I went to a site called Castri, which dates all the way to like 3000 BC. This is a really ancient site, and I just hiked up there and I had two things in my backpack. Actually, I had seven things in my backpack, but six of them were the same thing. Those were beers. And the other one was a drone, so I can get an aerial view of it. And I spent the whole day up there. There was no tourists there. It's an off the map ancient site that you don't really hear too much about. You hear about the Acropolis and Akrotiri and on Santorini or ancient Thera, things like that. But I like to get to these sites that are kind of not as well known, and it's just like takes me back. It's like magic, man. Like I'm just on this site. There's no one around. It's just me, nature, and all these old stones that someone's hands hewn from rock thousands of years ago. And it's just I don't know. I touch the stones and everything. It's like it's a whole thing for me. So that's how I travel. And then in the evenings, I go into the most local neighborhoods I can find, where there's no tourists or anything, and I just go into a local taverna or restaurant or bar, whatever it is. I mean, like if I'm in Egypt, the only bar I could find was this one called the Barrel Bar in the old Windsor Hotel. But I did actually, when I was in Jordan, I found a bar. It was on the roof of a hotel that the owner had a little secret place where he would go and drink in the evenings.
And he took
And
you
we
up there
go up
with him?
there, and yeah, and we just, that was right by Petra too.
Man,
Yeah,
that's
I
what's
just
up.
travel, and I end up like going to local wedding. I've been to local weddings. I've been to, I camped in Petra. This was 22 years ago, but I don't think you can do that anymore. But this was all stuff that I probably wouldn't have been able to do if I wasn't in with the locals. You got a question? Do
Yeah,
you think?
this is brother Jason, and this is for you.
Oh,
Do you?
do
Yeah.
you think it's a conspiracy to cover them up, or they were blended with Egyptians so much that they just disappeared? Oh, are you talking about the A group I was mentioning earlier?
Well, he's making reference to what I was asking you. Like, is this a legitimate or were the powers that be trying to just
Well, like I said, that
whitewash everything?
like in general, I think all we could do is speculate, obviously, right? But I think it's really kind of obvious to me that history has been squelched, like it's been squashed and kept under. Because, like I said, if you're going to talk about Egyptian history, you are invariably including Nubian history with that. Because, like I said, there was Nubians living and working and marrying and having kids in Egypt since the Old Kingdom.
And
And like that A group I was telling you about that disappeared when Narmer unified Egypt and started the first dynasty, I don't think they just disappeared. I know a lot, like there was a group of them that kind of lingered on, which they mistakenly called the B group. uh, but I think a lot of them were just absorbed into Egyptian culture and then into the C group, which came later, which was the precursor to the Kerma culture. And the Kerma culture is what the Egyptians called the Kush or the Kushite, which led to the kingdom of Kush, the Kushite kingdom. And and from that, you would get your 25th dynasty. Actually, technically, the 25th dynasty stemmed from a really powerful clan that rose in the Dongola. What was it called? The Dongola region, or there's a name for it. You can look it up. I mean, what was it called again? Man, it was Dongola Byte or Dongola something. If you put Dongola in there on the internet, you'll see what I'm talking about. And that was the one that actually technically led to the 25th dynasty. But again, all this says is that look how diverse the Nubians were. I mean, and now you have them living in Egypt. So to answer his question, do I think it's a conspiracy? I think very much it. Look, we can look at India, the colonization of India by Europeans and all this, and I studied that when I was in college. And you can look at different parts of the world where there's colonization, and it's a very concerted effort to to kind of conceal local culture and kind of erase it from the books. History is written by the victors, but history has also been written by colonizers. And so I don't know about conspiracy, but I think it was definitely a concerted effort to not make a big deal of it, and even to just ignore it completely. Egyptology is taken off. It was Napoleon that started Egyptology. He brought his scientists and everything over there. Everyone thinks he shot the nose off the Sphinx and all that stuff. That didn't
that's
happen.
that didn't happen.
No, there's images of this that were sketched of the Sphinx without its nose long before Napoleon. Um, Napoleon revered Egypt. He was very educated on it, and he brought a lot of scientists and archaeologists and people like that with him when he was in Egypt, and that's really what got Egyptology started. But we never really heard of a Nubianology, right?
Right.
And why not? If you look at a lot of the Egyptian artifacts and stuff, let's take the man. I'm jumping all over the place. I apologize for this, but
That's
my
all
mind.
good, bro. Because I
Have
know
you
you
guys
wanted
heard
to.
of the island of Elephantine in the Nile? Well, there's islands in the Nile, fairly large size islands in the Nile, and this one island was used for ivory trade, primarily ivory, elephant ivory and stuff. And what was going on there was that there was a triad of gods. One of the gods' name was Satis, and that's a Nubian goddess. Okay, so if you're going to be doing Egyptology, and you're on this island of Elephantine, which was a Greek term for an Egyptian name for it, which meant elephant land, because of all the elephants they brought there for trade from Africa. Well, it's in Africa actually. I mean, like deeper into Africa. Um, then why aren't they talking about who this goddess is? Satis. They make it sound like this triad of gods and goddess. This one goddess on Elephantine is just an Egyptian history, but the Satis, who's probably the oldest of the triad, is a Nubian goddess. But then you don't hear mention of that. So it seems like, why wouldn't someone say that? These are just questions we can ask and speculate the answers to, but it seems kind of obvious to me. Like, why wouldn't you talk about it? Because you don't want it to be known. Why don't you want it to be known? Well, then, you know,
Right. That's right. And then Miss Global Girls, she was like, it would be beneficial to have a history course on this topic in early
absolutely.
education, even starting with kindergarten.
I
Yup.
100% agree, because you know what that's going to do? It's going to raise a generation of people that see all this as human culture and stop looking at things from lines of this race or that race, or Egyptian or Nubian or land of Punt or Assyrian or Babylonian. This is all part of all of our history. And children that are raised to understand all this aren't going to grow up um, feeling like they've been left out, or they're not part of that human history. They don't feel like. I mean, we only talk about is in the schools. I think only I mean, when I was coming up in elementary school, the only history I learned was European and American history. That was it. I didn't hear anything about Southeast Asia, or South Asia or Africa. None of that. Um,
And I
and so
found
I
it.
grew up with this in my head. And when you grow up with that in your head and you get to an adult and then you start learning all this new stuff, you're going to go one of two ways. You're going to find it fascinating, or you're going to automatically reject it, because that's not what I was taught. So you raise this polarizing generations of people that then perpetuate it, because then they pass that on to their kids. So I 100%, 100% agree with Miss Globe Girl. All this stuff should be taught early on in history so that we can better understand all of our place in history. That history is not just about European culture. Um,
It's just
so
history. I mean,
it's
we
just
should learn
history.
it as
And this
is.
is a critical part of history. And look, some of the stuff we looked at, the Shabaka stone, probably the copy of the oldest written text of human thought known to man. The beer thing. I mean, these are just some of the stuff. There's so much out there.
Right.
So
And
I
I
got
know
to eat
you.
my blueberries.
Oh, it's all good, bro. But I know you wanted to to finish up on your thoughts on a relationship. So, in comparison
Oh,
to what's going on now, because we talked about this last night, and this is something that the manosphere harps on all the time, that um it would be better if women included their family, in particular their fathers, with their mating strategy, like to help them find a mate. And then when you told me that the Nubians were free of a caste system, they could go. So you could be just a regular person and fall in love with the princess who falls in love with you, and that would actually work out.
yeah, I think basically all you had to do is, if you wanted to marry someone, you just start living with them. They didn't really have a ceremony, neither did the Egyptians. I mean, I think there was a dowry involved, but that's only because if the husband, you know, uh, dies or something. That's real common back in those days. You could die from working if you worked in a quarry or something like that.
You
Um, it was
get caught
like,
by a
well,
lion.
the widow would have to go back and live with the family. But in those times, money was tight. And by money, I don't mean they didn't have money. I mean, I'm talking about trying to survive, the things you need to survive. And if you had to take on another mouth to feed. So that dowry was to ensure that could be done. So it'd be returned to the family of the widow. But basically, if you love someone, you could be with them. That's why there was intermarriages between Nubians and Egyptians. And like I said, Mentuhotep II, he was of Nubian descent, sixth pharaoh of the 11th dynasty, right there off the bat. His wife was Queen Kesmet. She was also Nubian descent. Um, and like I said, this is going way back to these earlier dynasties, not just the 25th. Um, and these are royalty. Nubian royal princesses and princes were brought up in Egyptian court since the Old Kingdom. How often do you hear that?
Yeah, I never heard
Probably
that.
never.
So you saying the court? You're talking about like they did
The
in
royal court
Europe?
of Egypt would bring Nubian prince and princesses and raise them in the court alongside their Egyptian children, side by side. When they came of age, the Egyptians would give them offices in the Egyptian regime. They could be mayor or things like that, or what would be the equivalent of a mayor. There was Nubian women who held the positions of high priestess in the temple of Amun. Um, Try to think of the name of some of them. I know, like Shepenupet II. She was Pianki's or P's. I call him Pianki. He was the first Nubian pharaoh of the 25th dynasty. That was his daughter. And she was labeled the divine adderess of Amun, which is like the second highest title you can get. Um, and Egyptian slash Nubian religion. Um, who else was there? There's man, I know Kashta was the king. Just before the 25th dynasty, there was a Nubian king named Kashta, and that was like around 700, like the mid 700s BC. I don't know the exact dates. They can Google it, but you know, he had it was, I think it was his wife. Ah, man, I think it was Amenidris. I think it was Amenidris was his wife, and she had the title of the God's wife of the moon. And that's the highest title. That's like the high priestess of everything. Nubian, uh, you know, over all of Egypt. You know, you only hear about Egyptian priests here and there and how they wore, you know, what is it, cheetah skin cloths, and they shaved their heads, and you know, this, that, and the other. But there was priestesses as well, and some of them were Nubian. Now I'm
That's
eating a banana.
that's all good, bro. I mean, this is the kind of teaching that people want, man. Because when Miss Globe Girl was asking, like, how you notice, like, oh, you're a professor. You don't look like the average professor, bro. Let's just keep it
Well, I don't
100.
wear this when I'm professing.
but
I was like literally scrambling to get set up. That's why I was late to your show.
It's
Um,
all good. Now, nah, we run on your time, bro. So, Knees Watchers, man, what's good, brother? I gotta holler at you, man. I'm gonna hit you up on Instagram, bro. But thanks for coming through, showing some love. And then, brother Jason, if you started a human history class, what era of history would you start teaching? Huh?
when I start with the Mesopotamians usually, because you're going all the way back to the start of the advent of agriculture, which is a big turning point. Now, when I say the advent of agriculture, it wasn't like an overnight thing. In fact, to adopt agriculture from hunting and gathering was not, it took 1,000 years. We usually hear of like the agricultural revolution and all this shit. No, not even close. It's kind of like when cell phones first came out, not everyone jumped on them. They're like, what do I need that for?
Yeah,
I
the
got
big the
pagers,
big
you
bag
know?
phone.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they go all the way back to those. Yeah. Um, but agriculture wasn't necessarily a good thing because it was hard work. You know, you didn't have the kind of crops we have today, where you get higher yields from a less amount of land. And you know, when you grind grains to make bread, pieces of that rock get in there. If you look at some of the earlier farmers, the skeletons of the earliest agriculturalists, their bodies were shorter, they were hunched over, they had bad teeth from getting ground up from eating bread with all this shit in it, and their diets consisted of like two or three different types of wheat. You had barley and emmer and another type of wheat. Not very diverse diet. Now you go in and you look at the people that are still hunting and gathering and haven't quite adopted agriculture because it doesn't make any sense to them. Like, why would I want to, you know, be stuck on one piece of land, work my ass off all day just to eat some bread? You know, I want some meat. You know, I want to eat, you know, I want to have a gazelle. I want to have all these different types of berries. I want to eat all this, that, and the other. Um, what's that? The reaper thing. Damn,
The
uh,
sickles that they use to.
sickle.
There you go.
That was invented like 50, 60,000 years ago. Tens of thousands of years before agriculture. So, you know, it's not like the land was just sparse and they had to hunt and gather and they're eating a couple berries off one bush and then they had to walk 20 miles to get more. It was lush enough where they could have sickles and harvest it from the wild growth.
Wow.
I mean,
So
that
you would
says a
start
lot,
there.
right?
So that's
So
where you
now,
start.
so they had a really diverse diets. It's like the Nubians when I was talking earlier about how Nubia wasn't under that ancient Eocene sea. So there's more sandstone. Oh, which by the way, their geology had another thing that Egypt really didn't have, and that was gold, which is what the Egyptian term nub is gold, and that's where some scholars think there's still a debate about that. Believe that's where the term Nubian came from. Their other name was Talseti, which means the land of the bowman, the expert bowman. But anyway, on the whole agricultural front, it made more sense for many centuries to keep hunting and gathering, and maybe you can have but that wasn't your mainstay. So it took a long time, and then it took a lot of inventions. The primary one being irrigation, which started out of Mesopotamia, and that's what really opened things up because southern Mesopotamia didn't have rain. So they would irrigate off the Euphrates River. There's two rivers through Mesopotamia. In fact, that's what Mesopotamia means, is Greek for the land between two rivers. And you have the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Tigris is a really fast moving, steep banked river. So they couldn't really irrigate out of that. It's just too violent of a river. But the Euphrates is a nice, slow, meandering, shallow banked river. And that's the river they actually irrigated off of. But once they were starting to irrigate, now you have big vast fields. You start to have more things that you can grow, like lentils, not just wheat. You got other things growing there now, and your diet gets a little more diverse. And now you start getting, you get like the plow, and you get all these other things. You start using draft animals, and now your production levels are going up, and now you have more free time, and that free time leads to the ability to have new hobbies, you can say. And so now you had pot makers, you had beer makers, bread makers. Now you have a society starting to grow. Now that you have a society growing, you have populations that are growing. And as you have a population growing, you need access to more arable land. Now you start to get this stratification of your social structure, a hierarchy, as if you will. And so now this starts to lead to social stratification. Now you have this expansion idea because you have to support this population, which the elites are going to encourage, because the bigger the population, the more taxes they can bring in, which increases their wealth, yada, yada, yada. One thing leads to another. Now you start bumping up against other culture groups, and this is where you start to have wars and battles and things. It's not to say there wasn't wars and battles back in the days of hunters and gatherers, but these would have been minor skirmishes, that were probably settled in a day or two. They
Okay.
weren't these pitched battles and stuff that we hear throughout history. So, agriculture, it was just something that was a very slow evolutionary process, and it took a long time for people to accept it.
Now
Um,
I got a question for you as in 1 second here. So yeah, that was a great answer there, bro. That was a great answer. Brother Doug, what's up? Welcome, welcome. And Brother Doug DL saying in the chat, salute to you, bro. I'm back. I've been missing, but I'm back and we hitting it hard. So Rook, let me ask you this. Do
yeah,
we know how they dealt with crime, punishment? Did they have a court system? Like what do we know anything about that?
usually disputes were settled between families. There's not a whole lot of information on this with Nubians, but I can extrapolate from Egyptian culture because the two are inseparable. Like I said, you have Nubians living and working and marrying and having kids in Egypt and vice versa. So when you hear me talking about Egypt, you can just assume that I'm also talking about Nubians. Um, as far as as far as crimes go, impalement was one of them. I think it was if you murdered somebody or something like that, the Egyptian would impale you. I mean, right up your ass and out your mouth. I mean, it was pretty brutal stuff.
Damn.
Obviously, I can't teach it that way in a class, but there you go. I'm on the internet, so I can
That's a
just say it like
deterrent.
it is.
That's a
You can
deterrent.
have, nose removed, tongue cut out. They didn't have jail. There was no concept of jail. In fact, jail didn't make any sense from a logical standpoint. Why would you take a criminal and then give them housing and feed them? You punish them on the spot and then move on. And that's how these ancient societies, the Nubians and the Egyptians, dealt with this kind of stuff. There was no, they later on, I think they had trials and stuff that were overseen by the king or pharaoh, or by the local magistrate. Uh, but a lot of this stuff was handled, in a day or two, and then that was it.
Wow.
But
Okay.
there was no jails or things like that, which I think that's something that we should think about because, and not to get off topic, but today we have felons that are in prison, and we're just kind of reinforcing that culture instead of putting them in and educating them and giving them reasons to live a different life. We're just basically encouraging them to never get out of that cycle. I think
Yeah.
that's another topic. I think the whole prison system's a real
But you're right though. It's a gladiator school, man. They send you to prison to reform you. And all you do is learn to be a better criminal because once you come out, you
they don't
can't
send you to
vote.
prison to reform you.
Well, but that's why I put the quotations up. They
That's
send you
what
to
they
prison
might
too
say.
before. Yeah, they tell you that, but they
Yeah.
make you a better criminal. You come out, you can't vote, you can't find a job, you can't find lodging, all because you have this criminal
And
background.
what
You
and
made this
how do you
mistake.
live? You got to go back to your world.
You got to go back to the world. And now, because like in Cincinnati, let's say in Cincinnati, once upon a time when I was in the streets doing whatever, had I got
Hmm.
caught, they would have locked me up, and I would have been interacting with people from Detroit, from Chicago, right, from Miami, from New York, all of us in this system sitting around, and I'm learning, taking notes, like, oh, okay, okay. So when I get out, I can expand my business from just my block, my city, to your block, your city. It
Hmm.
forces you to. I mean, it doesn't force you. I mean, we're grown people. You can do what you want to do. It's the choice. Obviously, is yours. I chose not to do it, but if you choose to, you could go from just some dude on the corner to becoming a plug, and there's so much money. So you're right. The way we handle our crime and punishment in our society today is wrong. And you're right. That is definitely a different topic for another time. But we're talking about war there for a minute.
We're talking
So
about what?
warfare and things like
Oh,
that. So
adjusting my blinds.
well, it's all
Okay.
good. Like, so we're talking about warfare, and we already know that the Nubians had the bowmen. Sounds like for the region,
Well,
like
they're
they
all
were.
bowmen. I just picked the Medjay because they were like extraordinarily good at it. Because remember, the Medjay came from the eastern Nubian desert, so they didn't have the luxury of the Nile and all that stuff. So they had to be
They
like
had to hunt.
extremely good at hunting and gathering, and that kind of stuff really builds a skill set that's really unprecedented in today's world for the most part, unless you're like elitely trained for years. Because remember, these Medjay were raised from, I mean, from early adolescence to use the bow, to know how to hunt prey, to sneak up on stuff. I mean, they weren't fighting pitched battles and lining up, in red coats with,
Right.
these guys. You wouldn't know. You'd only know a Medjay was on you after you had an arrow in your ass.
Oh wow.
So
So let's talk about the technology then. I mean, did they devote a lot of resources to their war tech? I mean, because you hear about the chariots. Of course, we're talking about bows.
the chariots probably came from the Hyksos. We can talk about the Hyksos because everyone thinks they invaded Egypt, but they didn't. But yeah, as far as one, if you want to get to that chariot stuff, we can. But yeah, I mean, of course, they dedicated a lot of time to find the bow was the first weapon in all of humankind that used stored energy. you know, and now all our weapons do that.
Right.
And but yeah, they would do. They would look at different types of woods, what worked best. How to make their string, what makes their arrow what's the right fletching, what makes what good weight on the tip of their arrow is best for flight. Shape of the arrowhead, all this stuff. Of course, they're going to think about all these things and perfect them, and then get good at using them. And that's exactly what they did. And like I said, it wasn't just the Medjay. There's, in the area of Wawat, which is the area that was really rich in gold. It's where see if I could draw this backwards. So it's where the Nile goes like this and then back down again. So it has this little thing. This area in between, I should draw it on some, but I don't have paper. But anyway, that was the area of Wawat. That's where a lot of the gold was, and in the Eastern Desert. But the Urjet and the Setju and the Yam areas of Nubia, they were all expert bowmen. Like I said, Egyptians referred to them not just as Nub, which is people think might translate to gold, but as Tauseti, which is the land of the bow. And like I said, all throughout all the Egyptian kingdoms, all the pharaohs would hire elite Nubian warriors to fight with them. They wouldn't have won a lot of their battles without them. In fact,
So
not
I
just
put up
because
a
of their
couple
bows, but
maps.
because they were highly skilled fighters.
Yeah, I put up a couple maps so you wouldn't have to draw. But were you talking about this
Yeah.
area
Okay.
here?
So yeah, pull that one up bigger.
I'm not. It's not letting me get any bigger with this one.
No,
Hold on.
you see
Yeah,
where that it has kind of like a loop going off to the right. It kind of
this one
loops
like
out like
here.
that. That
Yeah.
would be the area of Walwood.
Okay.
And the
And
Medjay would be there in the eastern desert, just north of that. If you can see it, I can kind of see it. I think it says eastern desert. That
it
would
does
be
right
where your
here.
Medjay warriors lived, and that was a pretty hostile environment because later on, under Hatshepsut, who was a New Kingdom 18th dynasty pharaoh, a full-fledged pharaoh, not just a queen. She led an expedition that had to go through that eastern desert, and then they took boats on the Red Sea down to the land of Punt to trade, among other things. But probably the primary thing was myrrh. In fact, she brought back, I think, 36 myrrh trees from Punt that the Puntites wrapped. They cut the roots out and they wrapped the roots in these baskets and that held the moisture, so they can actually. So they were transplanting whole trees from
Wow.
Punt, which is probably modern day Eritrea and the Horn of Africa, parts of Somalia, and also I think across in modern day Yemen on the southwestern coastal area of the Arabian Peninsula. I think all of that was the land of Punt. I think they had both sides. Um, but yeah, I mean, so yeah, that eastern desert was pretty brutal. So that was like a multi-day track to get through there. And I think actually there's some inscriptions that say Hatshepsut's army had to fight some of the locals there to get through. And I have to wonder if that's not those weren't Medjay, Nubian semi-nomadic herdsmen and stuff.
So here's the thing. You said female pharaoh.
Yep,
I didn't know that was a thing, bro.
absolutely. She wore the false beard of the pharaoh and everything. Hatshepsut, 100% a pharaoh.
Okay, and
Yeah, people should know that.
I do no idea. So especially now with the big thing with women's right and equal like equality and all, like you would think that would be the big poster. It was the
Well,
female pharaoh.
what's really interesting with Nubian society is that they had held women to a much higher status. There was never really equality. Kings could still have multiple wives, but wives couldn't have multiple husbands. But they held women a much higher regard. Let me see if I can pull up. There's actually a text by a Nubian king that talks about. If you just give me a second here, that talks about, uh, his respect and admiration for women. Let's see. Go ahead and talk while I try to.
All right, I'll talk. And brother, when you finish that, brother Jason has a question for you. He was like, we're
Oh,
both
I don't
genders.
have my screen up right now. I'm on another screen because I'm trying to find this.
Right.
So
And
I don't even see what's going on there. Right, just for a quick though.
yeah, and
Uh,
while you're looking, and because it's like we're both genders taught to hunt and gather at the same time. I'm gonna make a stab at that, and I'll let Rook give the true answer. But I would say probably not. I would think the gender roles were pretty static back there. But and when Rook is done looking for this text, we'll definitely get into it. And
yeah, it's most likely it would have been the men only. Uh, oops, I'm trying to go through my old notes here. But yeah, that probably would have been hunting would have been men, gathering generally women, that kind of thing. I think that was kind of a standard, like you said, through the ancient world. But like I said, a lot of Nubian history has been lost due to the construction of the Aswan High Dam and the Meroe Dam in Sudan, which has flooded almost 3,600 square miles of Nubian land. Flooded. They're under lakes now. Look up on Google Maps. Look up Lake Nasser. That everything under Lake Nasser was Nubian land. And remember, the Nubians lived along the Nile, and that's exactly what's been flooded. And no effort was made to salvage any of the Nubian sites that are now, unfortunately, probably gone forever. But we could have learned a lot more from Nubian culture, like did the women, hunt alongside the men, and that kind of thing. Um, let's see. Here we go. I'm gonna just read this to you, so I still don't have your screen up.
okay,
But um, let's see. Oh wait, no, that's not it. Sorry, but go ahead. Is there another question up there?
let's see. Yep. And brother Jason has another one. Marveling on and all these other places make it seem like the women are always the best person with the bow and arrow. Um, I can't think of any societies
I don't know.
offhand.
I haven't seen any depictions or heard anything about women being, part of that hunting and war, all the warrior stuff. Like every image, like those wooden warriors that you pulled up earlier,
Hmm.
those are all males. But it could also just been it was easier just to make the same figure over and over again.
Yeah, or it could all be under Lake Nasser, buried under all the soil, and
Yeah,
we just
or
didn't get a
like
chance to find it.
or the Meroe Reservoir.
Right, and
Um,
Miss Globe Girl was saying, I believe I read somewhere that Nubian women were also warriors.
Yeah, I have not heard that, but it's I'm not saying it wasn't a thing. Here it is. Kings held their mothers in highest regard. I'm reading my notes here. Kings held their mothers in highest regard, and there are many examples of prayers by kings to their mothers, such as "Have regard for my mother and establish her children on earth." There's another one where he says, "Look upon the womb of my mothers," meaning the women of Nubia, "for me, and to establish their children on earth. Act for them as you have acted for me, the king, and let them attain what is good." So when we look at depictions of Nubian women alongside Nubian kings or Nubian queens and kings, they're the same height. Now, usually the standard was that the men would always be portrayed much bigger than the women. And when you look at Nubian art, they're the same height and everything. I mean, you could pull up tons of examples of this.
Well, hold on, I got something for you right here, Rook. I just pulled it up. Um, I'll make it bigger here, but I haven't read anything. But I think this is a depiction of what you're saying, right? This is supposed to be a male and a female Nubian,
They're the same height.
same
You'll
height. Looks
see
like they're the
that
same.
throughout. You'll see that throughout their imagery and sculptures.
And what was the name of the queen?
Ke-
Amarnaeus.
Queen Kesmet, you talking about, or
It's here, and it's hard to. I can't make it any bigger, but they were basically showing some different queens of the Nubian dynasty, and
I know
because
that
I
the queens were usually given titles of high priestess.
okay.
Like I was saying, like Pianki's, what was it? Pianki's daughter, Shepunupit II, had positions of like high priestess. That I told you, the divine Adoris of Amun, um, and Amenedris, who had a title of the God's wife of Amun, which is a spiritual um, marriage kind of thing. So I've heard of Nubian women holding the highest positions in the land in terms of being high priestess, and even being what would equate to mayors of entire cities like Thebes, for instance, was ruled by a Nubian woman. But as far as warrior women, I would actually that's something I'll have to look into because I was never taught that, or I've never really come across anything about that.
And
And of course,
I dropped the article in the chat if you guys want to read up on it. I just did a quick little search, and this is one of the first thing that came up. And I'm not going to read the whole thing here today, but for Ms. Global, especially if you want to jump on that, it kind of touched on some of the warrior queens of Nubia. Um, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Rook comes back with. We give him some time to go find, what really happened. But
yeah,
but yeah, and that was but yeah, what Brother Jason was talking about in Marvel, especially now, especially when you look at what's going on with Black Panther, which I really love. I love the concept. I love that we have that in our in this world, this fantasy world that we're creating of our heroes and stuff like that. Of course, you want to include some women.
mhm,
So, and I think that's good. Just like I'm happy now that I'm seeing people who look like me, who were the first humans, who the first writings and all that. That makes you feel good inside. I mean, yeah, it's
yeah.
history, but it's like, wow, I don't feel like I'm just a descendant of a slave, which is
It's
pretty
all
much
out.
how that's
It's all
done.
out there now with the internet. People can create things like these podcasts and their own channels and stuff, and then promote the history. You
and
know.
and and then I did want to talk about the chariots, and then we can move on. But I do remember hearing about chariots and how the Egyptians used chariots uh, in battle. And I mean, of course, you squared me away on how King Tut never would have been in a chariot, like with the in
Nope.
our last episode. He's talking about
Yeah,
his spine was fused.
during the second intermediate period of Egypt, Scholars for a long time thought there was a Hyksos invasion, and they brought the chariot. And after that, Egyptians had this new weapon of mass destruction, And but really, more recent analyses of DNA from sites in the Nile Delta region. Um, what was the? I'm trying to think of the name of the site. There's a couple. There's actually one site in general that was like the site, because I know that the Hyksos ruled from avarice, but the site that they did this DNA sampling from, man, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, they found that these Hyksos, which may have descended from the Levantine area, but they were already living in Egypt, in Lower Egypt, including that would include the Delta region, for centuries. So it was very unlikely that it was an invasion. It was more like it was a population that had been living there and growing in numbers and advancing to positions of political office, so to speak, and then taking control of the region. So it wasn't an invasion. So you have these Hyksos, which Manetho, who was a Ptolemaic era historian, referred to them as shepherd kings, and the Egyptians, I think, called them Hekau. What was it? Um, Hekau Kausut or something like that, which translates to rulers of foreign lands and all this. And they were from foreign lands. The DNA analyses show that they were, but they had been living in Egypt for centuries in the Delta region. So seems like, with the chariot and all that, like they invaded and brought the chariot with them and all this. And seems like if that was the case, then if they were living there already, that the chariot would have then therefore been an invention that came out of Lower Egypt by the Hyksos, perhaps. But I think it was like Tel Al Daba. That was the site. Tel Al Daba is on the Nile, and that's the site where they did this strontium isotopic analysis on their bones,
Okay.
and found that they were not actually Egyptians, the Hyksos, but that it showed that they had been there for centuries already, living there. It was a mixed population. Look, again, this goes back to the whole thing. Egyptians were a very mixed population that included Nubians and then Hyksos, and people from the Eastern Desert, and even probably Libyans and beyond. So you had a very mixed group of people all living under the Egyptian cultural attitude, because look, like with the 25th dynasty, when Egypt was conquered by Persians and later by the Ptolemies, it was actually Alexander of Macedon, but his general came in there, and then all his offspring. They used Egypt to their benefit. They really, I mean, with the exception of Cleopatra, they really didn't give a shit about Egyptian culture. Cleopatra was the only one that bothered to even learn how to write and read in Egyptian or speak it. None of the other Ptolemies did. But what we have is a very mixed culture. And when the 25th dynasty, the Nubian dynasty, took control of all of Egypt, they did not try to use it to their benefit or destroy it or anything. They did quite the opposite, actually. They tried to promote and rebuild Egyptian culture. They actively tried to rebuild it. Pianki, Shabako, Shabiktu, Taharka or Taharka, even Tatamani, who was the last pharaoh of the 25th dynasty. Every single one of them actively built temples to Amun. They tried to rebuild, temples that were kind of falling apart. They adopted Egyptian dress and standards. They took the five names of, that the pharaohs would take. When you ascended the throne, you take these five names, and they did all this stuff because they didn't want to destroy Egypt. In fact, if it wasn't for the 25th dynasty, Egypt would have just been gone probably forever. So the Nubians, and what this shows is that Nubians were a part of Egyptian culture just as much as the other way around. And so they felt an affinity. The fact that they felt that strong of an affinity to culture, with who they did have battles with on and off for thousands of years. I mean, there's tons of wars and battles and things fought, which was always perpetrated, almost always perpetrated by the Egyptians because of Nubian gold. I mean, even Akhenaten, who was the pharaoh, the heretic pharaoh who uh, came up with the one God belief in Aten, and he's this peaceful guy that wanted nothing to do with the rest of the world. He was only focused on Aten and his religious pursuits and his spirituality. He redid the art form in Egypt. He kind of let the military go fallow, all this stuff. If you look at the Amarna letters, there's rulers up in the Levant area begging for his support because Egypt's traditionally supported that region, and Akhenaten didn't care, and so everyone thinks like Akhenaten just didn't really care, but he cared enough to send armies into Nubia to keep securing Nubian gold. He built temples around areas that were Nubian mining sites for gold. So, even Akhenaten, who's this peaceful guy, still, found Nubia extraordinarily important. So, in all the spirituality, I guess you need gold to keep that going, right?
You gotta have money to keep it
But
going.
also, to his credit, he did build temples that were nowhere near sites of gold, which suggests that there's some kind of a ritual or religious significance to lands in Nubia as well. I mean, there's so much that we don't know about Nubian culture. I mean, we got so many different Nubian gods. Like Amun was syncretized. So, syncretism is when you take two different cultures and you combine them to make sense to a combined culture kind of thing in terms of religion. Like if you look at the Virgin Mary of Central America and she has all the light coming out behind her, it's real obvious when you see it all the time. That's a syncretism of the Virgin Mary with the Nahua Earth Mother goddess. Serapis in the Egyptian god that I think it was the Ptolemies made him up. He's a syncretism of Osiris and the Apis bull. We got Apidemek, who's it's the anthropoid three-headed lion god of Nubia with 4 arms, and there's lion temples down in present-day Sudan that are dedicated to him. How many people know about this guy? He was a warrior, hunter god, a defender of Nubian kings and queens. He's considered a creator god. He's associated with the Nile. We have Eren Snefus, or Eren Snefis. That's probably an Egyptian name, but it's definitely a Nubian god. Also took the lion form. Was also a protector deity. We have Sabu Makol. That's a life giver Nubian protector deity, often seen with Eren Snufis. We have Ekadis, who's maybe a moon god, Nubian moon god. Satis, who I mentioned earlier, who's part of the Elephantine triad, pure Nubian goddess right there. We have Anukis and Mikhet. We don't know anything about a lot of these other gods. But what that tells us is there's so much that we still don't know about Nubian culture. And, anyone watching this, I don't know how old your audience is or if they have kids or whatever, they could pursue this stuff. The colleges are starting to offer more and more courses on this, but you don't need to wait for a college to offer a course to be an autodidact, to pursue your own knowledge on these things, because the stuff is out there. A lot of it's been lost, again, like I said, because of the dams that were constructed. I think the Aswan High Dam was constructed on the first cataract and completely inundated the second cataract. I mean, everything guaranteed from the second cataract south is Nubian land for sure. The Meroe Dam was built, I think, on the submerged of the fourth cataract. These are like really critically important places where there would have been temples and trading depots or entrepôts, things like that, that would have been trade hubs connecting cultures on the Red Sea in Egypt and even Manoa with sub-Saharan Africa. And we haven't even touched that topic yet. That was another integral part. Where do you think they were getting the ebony and the ivory and all these things that were like the Egyptians sought after? Earlier, you saw there was an image you pulled up with a giraffe that had a monkey on its neck, and you thought it was a lizard.
Yep.
Do you have that still?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. 132. And it's funny you were talking about that. When you were talking about taking the two deities and making them one to kind of appease the people.
Syncretism. Yeah.
Syncretism. There was a and I couldn't find it. I was looking for it, but a uh, there was an image of Viking Jesus. They had on armor
Yeah,
and
that's another
gold.
syncretism. So what happened was with that was when they came into that region, you got these Vikings, which I'm half. We have a situation where they're looking at, they're like, okay, wait a minute. So your God got crucified, had to wear a thing of thorns, and he was killed. This is Viking culture with Thor. I mean, we're talking like, an Odin and stuff. These are warrior gods. You can't be coming to us, with this god that, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but the way they saw it was like he basically got his ass kicked and killed. Why
Right.
would we follow a god like that? So what the Christians did was they syncretized them with Viking mythology and stuff. So they put Jesus in chainmail and gave him a sword, made him look more like a warrior god. And the whole point of syncretism is to get other cultures to accept yours. So you got to make these compromises like that. And we see it everywhere, dating all the way back to ancient Nubia and
You
right
saw
up.
it. You saw it with Christianity. You saw it with Constantine. I mean, Christmas. That was
Yeah.
that was
Easter,
like
Christmas, yeah,
yeah.
Halloween. You go through all of them.
You go off because it's like, well, we got these druids basically. We
So
need to
one of
get
the yeah. So one of
you
the
know
courses I teach is on the Minoans. And if you look here, it looks like there's some kind of like iguana sticking to this giraffe's neck, being led by two Nubians. This would be at a trade entrepot. And what you have there is actually a blue monkey, which is most likely from sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a trade item. It was actually highly sought after, not just by the Egyptians. They like to keep these exotic animals in the royal court. But we also see frescoes, put in blue monkey frescoes, Minoa. And you'll find these same blue monkeys in Minoan Crete, which suggests to me that the Minoans were trading with the Nubians as well. If not directly, then certainly through the Egyptians. But I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be directly, because I've seen depictions where you see Nubians with Minoans. How often do you hear that? I
never
mean,
and
there's all this stuff is out there, but there's no one teaching it, and I think that's a travesty, and it needs to change. So,
and Doug was saying
um,
Odin when we were having that quick discussion about the warrior Jesus. I think what they did was they wanted to insert. They wanted them to believe in Jesus, and they wanted the Vikings to come over and be baptized. And the only way they can do that is they had to make Jesus into a warrior as
yeah,
opposed
and
to
being
a
the warrior.
pacifist, right? Because you tell the story of him being taken by the Romans and everything that happened to him. That's gonna turn off any warrior. Like, man, that's not a warrior. You don't
Yep.
get in the Valhalla like that.
Right.
So
It's like this. This is my Valhalla Viking. If Jesus isn't walking with one of these,
yeah,
they're not going to
yeah.
want. They don't want to hear
They don't want to
it.
hear it. So yeah, and I wanted to last night you said something to me that blew me away. You were talking about some of the gods, and there was a three-headed god. I don't know if it was a lion god or it was a three-headed god.
That's Apademak. That's a Nubian god. There's Lion Temple, I think, in Meroe, which is in northern Sudan. You can visit these places still. I encourage anyone that has a sense of adventure to buy yourself a ticket to Khartoum and find your way north and get to Meroe and other sites where you'll find extraordinary Nubian pyramids. Pull up some Nubian pyramids, let them look at these. But Apademak has a lion temple. There's multiple lion temples actually, and this was a human-figured three-headed lion god with four arms. Sometimes he was depicted as with a snake or as part of a snake, and I know from other ancient cultures, including the Minoans and others, that the snake was usually a symbol of transformation and rebirth and fertility. And in fact, epidemic has been associated with fertility for sure. And this is, I think it's if you want to pull up the temple, I think it's called the Lion's Temple at Nekka. These are the Nubian pyramids. They're a lot steeper. They're about 70-degree angles compared to
Yeah,
the Egyptians, but that they were able to get away with that because they're shorter. But and at their height, they would be 150 feet tall. Some of the taller ones. Unfortunately, if you notice from these pictures, a lot of them have the tops cut off, and that was because of European adventure seekers who came in there in the 19th century and maybe the early 20th. And they basically just crawled to the top of these things, start pulling them apart, throwing the blocks right off the side. Don't give a shit about Nubian culture. There's treasure in here. Tossing these blocks off the side of the pyramid until they got down into and then looted these things. Although they did end up finding the treasures were actually probably in the
And there
mortuary
you go, Rook. This is what you're
that are
talking about
around it.
right here. This is what you're talking about right here.
Yeah, so that was done by a white dude. So yeah, I mean, you see the blocks laying there on the ground. So these assholes just went in there and they're just looking, and that's a piece of human history right there, that's just been destroyed uh, for someone's gain. But we see this happening all the time, especially during the Ottoman Empire. We had like the Elgin marbles. They're only called the Elgin marbles because Lord Elgin stole them out of Greece, and now they're housed in a museum in Europe. I think it's London or something. And but you see these scrolls like these papyrus scrolls and stuff from Egypt and elsewhere, mostly Egypt, and they got the names of the guys that bought them at auction attached to them now. And they had nothing to do with the scrolls. We see this everywhere. You go to museums and what are you looking at? You're looking at stuff from other cultures and other parts of the world, and a lot of that stuff's been looted. And none of these museums want to send any of it back as it should be, because then that starts a precedent that now all museums are going to have to return these things to their rightful owners, which are these countries. There's the lion-headed god there. His name is Apidemak. I might be saying it wrong. I'm sure the Nubians would have said it much more beautifully than I can. But he was a defender god of Nubian kings and queens, associated with fertility. He was associated with the Nile. He was a warrior, a hunter. And like I said, he's sometimes you'll see him depicted with a snake. Here you only see him in profile with one head, but usually you'll see him with three heads, one facing forward and two to the side. And then he has four arms usually as well, depicted.
And I always thought that was I always thought that was a reggae thing growing up.
Oh, well, yes. Yeah, so that's where they got it from. They got it from this. And probably this is the sad thing is that, someone was really interested in learning about, there's a sketch right there of the three-headed god. Someone did a sketch of it. Here's someone that wanted to learn more about Black history, probably read some books because this would have been before the internet, came across an image, only knew it as a Nubian god, probably didn't know the name, Apidemak. Didn't know any of the anything that the god was associated with. Was it a hunter god? Was it this or that or the other? Was a moon god, a sun god? Didn't know anything about it, but found some pride in it, and then adopted the image. Put it to his reggae album and whatnot. And then now over the years, you see this symbol in reggae, but nobody knows what it is because it got lost, and now it's associated with reggae. You see, so I think that. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, brother Doug. Good stream. Back to work. Appreciate that, brother Doug. Catch us in the replay.
But yeah, so I mean that's a sad thing though, because now it gets associated with something that it's not actually associated with, and that's important that people know. Like, hey, okay, it's associated with this, but where did it come from? What does this mean? What does this mean to my culture? What does this mean to human culture in general? And so. Podcasts like this is why I was thinking, like last night, I was like, your podcast covers a lot of topics. And I was like, I'm going to get in before you find your niche, because your niche probably won't be this. But I thought it was a good opportunity to get this out there. I was just sitting there having a drink last night. And I was, just flipping through, looking over my lectures, because I'm doing a new lecture series and starting in September when I get back from Naxos. And I thought, you know what, this would probably be really cool. And that's when I text you. And Here we are the next day.
Because that's how I roll. And this is my brother right here, man. Like I said, I got a handful of it. This dude right here, yeah, man. If only I could tell y'all the stories. If only. We are down like that. But here's the thing, though. I promise you now, I'm gonna stay random. I'm gonna stay this, and I've already promised Rook that we're gonna do once a month.
That's how you'll come across what you like, what works with you and your audience.
I'm gonna stay random. Even if when I find my niche, I'm going to stay random. We've already discussed doing once a month. We're gonna jump on and we're gonna talk about some historic stuff. Because I brought up to him yesterday because Rook, y'all don't know this, but the man's a real pirate. Uh, he's got some pirate stories. But the thing is this. I was like, bro, I didn't know Blackbeard had herpes. It was like, or
Yeah,
whatever he
man. I
had.
mean, you're at sea for months on end, and you finally get to shore. You really don't care where you stick it.
so but we're gonna do that. We're gonna talk about hopefully next time we get together, everyone's heard of 300 and everyone's heard of the Battle of
Oh yeah, right.
Thermopylae. But what
Uh-huh.
I didn't know, and Rook told me this, was it just 300 Spartans and some Arcadians?
No, most definitely wasn't. There was 7,000 men. Now Xerxes' army, I think the ancients like Herodotus said there was like a million of them or da da da, right? Modern scholarship probably pegs that closer to 100,000, maybe 150,000, which is a huge army. Think of the logistics behind trying to move an army like that on foot, keeping them supplied with water and all this stuff. But yeah, you have let's be conservative. Let's say there was 100,000 Persian fighters, soldiers, warriors, whatever you want to call them. But there wasn't 300 Spartans. There were 300 Spartans, but they were part of 7,000. I think it was there was 300. I don't know the total breakdown on it, but I do know that there was a certain point where Ephialtes gave Xerxes the secret goat path that went around the hot gates
To flank
to
them.
lead the army to flank Leonidas from behind. Now, when Leonidas realized that he was compromised like that, he sent back most of the troops to go back to Athens because he knew they needed to be alive to fight another day, and then he would remain. And this is the story of the 300, where it was supposedly just these 300 Spartans that remained behind. But not mentioned is there was 700 Thespians. There was 900 Helots. Helots is a Spartan euphemism for slave. So there was 900 slaves, and they were on the front line right there, probably front and back. And then you had the Spartans in the middle. There's 400 Thebans. And the Thebans were the only ones that actually surrendered. The rest fought to the death, including the slaves. How often do you hear about slaves in 300 fighting? And then that's kind of just how history goes. You don't hear about the people that are under the thumb of others, including in this case the Spartans, who used them to cover their front lines. But there's a simultaneous battle at sea
Yes.
uh, at Artemisium, the Battle of Artemisium at sea, that was led by Themistocles. When he heard that, so remember this, there were 7,000 Greeks, or mixed tribes of Greeks. When Leonidas got outflanked, he sent most of them back, except for the ones I mentioned: the 900 slaves, the 700 Thespians, the 400, blah blah, and they stayed and remained and fought. That was the 300. So it was 300 plus another 1,000 and something, right?
Yeah. So
But when Themistocles found out, because Themistocles was leading the battle at sea at Artemisium, and when he found out, they turned around and they went to Salamis and waited for the Persians there at Salamis, which was way over by Patras and all that, over closer to Athens. Basically, it's a little bit west of Athens, and there's a strait there between the island and mainland Greece. But anyway, so yeah, the 300 that died alongside over 1,000 other fighters, 900 of which were helots or slaves. And then Xerxes' naval fleet actually got hit by two different storms. I think there was oh man, how many? I think there was 270 triremes, which are the Greek fleet, versus over 1,200 Persian ships at first. But the Persians got hit by a gale force storm in the northern Aegean, which wiped out a third of their navy right off the bat. Boom, act of God. I don't know what. I think Poseidon, or as he was called, Poseidon. I think Poseidon was working on the side of the Greeks. Then Xerxes finally gets to the Battle of Artemisium and tries to send another 200 ships around to outflank the Greek triremes, and that group got hit by another storm. I mean,
Wow.
so who really won the Battle of Artemis? I know the Persians technically won, but Poseidon was had a hand in it, I think.
That's kamikaze before
But then they went on
kamikaze.
to Salamis, and at Salamis, the Greeks used weather, their knowledge of local weather there. There's these things called diurnal winds. At nighttime, air over land cools faster than air over water. This has to do with the water's ability to hold heat longer than land. And so what you have is these temperature differentiations, and colder air is denser than warmer air. So cold air will displace warm air. And these are called diurnal winds. So during the day, you'll have the wind coming in from the sea over land, and at night it'll come over land over the sea. And the Greeks knew this at the Straits of Salamis. And so those ships that escaped from Artemisium went there and hung out and waited for this overconfident Persian fleet who just won the battle. Now they're moving on. They just took the hot gates, or the Thermopylae, and here they come. Athens has been abandoned on purpose. That's another story. And they get to this spot, and the Greeks just wait for them. And the timing was perfect. These winds shifted, and the seas got choppy, and the Greeks were like hiding in this nice little perfect cove. And the sides of the Persian ships are really broad and tall. And so the winds were taking them, and they couldn't even turn and maneuver. And you got these triremes that are very low to the water level, really low center of gravity with all these oremens. You have 3 levels of oremens. That's why they call them triremes. And these are very strong, stout, high endurance guys. And they just outmaneuvered the Persians. The Persians are flailing in this white water, and here comes all these Greeks coming out, and they just rammed them and sank them and won that battle. And that was a turning point. All of Western history would have been completely different. Maybe instead of hearing about Constantinople and the Christian and this and that, we might all be Zoroastrians right now.
Which that'll be another show. Like, okay, what would I be?
And stuff, but yeah, go ahead.
That's what's up, man. So like with the weather, like that's that's divine wind. That's kamikaze before kamikaze was a thing. You know what I mean? And that's like that's the story for another time. But no, we're gonna get into that once a month. I'm gonna try to get Rook on here. His schedule permitting, because he is a busy man. And we'll get Rook on here, and we'll learn some history.
Yeah, I'm storm chasing in a couple of weeks, so
yeah, I'm jealous, bro. I'll make the next one for sure. I ain't went on one of those yet with you, but I want to go. I should have made plans to go on this one, but and I can't wait to see the footage from that. So, all right, man. Like we pretty much we've wrapped this one up, man. I wanted to end with we're gonna go into just the way things are today. Like just harking back to relationships. Do you think relationships in that back then worked better than it does now? Because that's the big thing now. Like say relationships.
There's actual Egyptian texts that we find where there's husbands complaining about their mother-in-laws. Wives complaining. Not wives directly, because it's usually these texts were from the male's perspective, but you hear about the same problems we hear about today. All over in Egyptian text, like, my son-in-law got mad and threw his wife out. Now my daughter's back living with me, and now I got another mouth to feed. Like, all upset. There's another text where there's a neighbor says, yeah, my neighbor just kicked his wife out. Now I've been taking care of him, and I want compensation. This another mouth. This is expensive for me. This and that. And just like you can get married just by starting living together, you can get divorced by kicking your wife out. Wow. So there's always going to be conflicts. It's always been a problem. Males and females often think differently. Whatever you want to connect that to, but it's just, if you ask me, I couldn't even live with a friend, a good friend of mine, male or female, because they would probably annoy me after a few days. Living with people is just not an easy thing. So relationships would have been extraordinarily complicated. And back then, it wasn't like you really dated a lot, I don't imagine. I think once you might see each other here and there and this and that, but you're pretty much living with them. You made your choices straight on, so you're going to be living with your mate. And there's always going to be conflicts with that in any situation. We're all human, and we all are unique. And it's we usually, the whole opposites attract. Well, they attract, but then they repel when you're living together, right?
That's
So as
hilarious.
far
And
as
let me
relationship goes, back then they were just as problematic as they are today. We just don't hear about it as much because we're so detached from that time. But humans are humans, you know.
and let me ask you this. With respect to hypergamy, was that had to be a thing back then, right? You wanted the biggest, you wanted the best. So would you could you extrapolate that that
There was no money back then, you know.
but
So
it's
biggest
about
and best
strength.
means maybe you had some more cows, you know, or something, or you had more
Okay.
grain in your grain reserve, you know, in your storage pits or whatnot. But you know, it was yeah. I could only speculate on that if they were trying to, you know, work their way up that social ladder. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff where people were trying to move up the social ladder by bribing to get their kids to get educated as scribes. That was one of the big things in Egypt because you know you're either going to end up becoming a farmer or you know making beer or bread or whatever the other professions there were. But really, if you really want to make money, you want to learn to read and write because then you could be a scribe to the royal court. You could be an architect, you know, like you know, and make a lot of money doing that. And um, but to get into those kind of positions, usually take you had to grease some palms and stuff. So
You had to grease.
there was always the it's always been a thing to try to work your way up the ladder in shady ways.
And Miss Globe Girl, she has something to say, which is hilarious. Was there any text about women trying to be masculine for being useless after a certain age? And then she
Being you,
follows, yeah, she follows that up with "I'm just being facetious" because
I was like, what?
yeah, because out here in the world, especially in the manosphere part of the internet, they have a term called the wall, and
Okay,
this is all about.
I'm totally ignorant to all the. So you have to,
Hey, I gotta explain it to you. So the wall
yeah.
is this. So when it comes to the sexual marketplace, right, dating, uh, they say these aren't DL Saints words. These are the words of the manosphere. That there's a point in a woman's life where her value as a on a sexual marketplace, not her value as a human, not her ability to make money, but her value in as far as men finding her attractive goes down. It falls off at a certain point, and that's generally around the mid to late 30s, definitely by 40s. That they hit what's called the wall, and men stop finding them attractive. 35, Miss Globe Girl is saying this out there. Um,
Mm.
and that's called the wall. Men hit the wall too. It's just the wall is different for men because it takes us longer, and you know we to get the things that women find attractive. You know, money and status and clout and whatever. And if you keep yourself in shape, so that's what she was making reference to. Because in
Okay.
today's culture, if you hit the wall, which you had a story about a woman who hit the wall that you met on a dating app when I was in LA. This is a long time
Yeah, it was a
ago.
long, long time ago.
Yeah,
But yeah, you know, hitting the wall, if there was a wall you hit in ancient times, it would have been a lot earlier than 35 because a lot of people didn't live past 35,
right. There've been like
unless
12.
you were an elite. This isn't nothing to do with human lifespan. Human lifespan has always been the same, but human life expectancy, that's a different animal. And your life expectancy is dictated by your environs. You know, this includes stress, but also, you know, access to you know, medical stuff like penicillin and pasteurized milk, you know, all this kind of stuff, medicines and surgeons and this and that. And then there's also war. You know, look at in Afghanistan, where people are dying at very young age, and that's due to war and lack of infrastructure. Look at all across sub-Saharan Africa, life expectancy of people is much lower. In the ancient world, everywhere was pretty much like that. We did have pharaohs like uh, I think it was Pepe or whatever. I think he lived to almost 100 years old. A lot of evidence suggests that he may have ruled 60 to 90 years. He
Wow.
celebrated the Hebsed festival, which pharaohs weren't allowed to celebrate till after their first 30 years of rulership, and then every 3 years after that. And if you count all the festivals that he celebrated, it would have put him up there in the 60 to 90 years of reign. So yes, you could definitely live a long time, but if there was a wall for the rest of society, it probably was 16 or 17 years old. I mean, Egyptian males usually got married around 20, or maybe you know mid 20s, I think it was, and the girls usually in their late teens with Egyptians anyway. You know, you go to Greece and girls were getting married when they were 12 or as soon as they were, you know, menstruating. Uh, but I think the wall would have been hit at a much earlier age, so people needed to get their shit together right away.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your last take on this because you're not a red pill guy. Like you know you're Rook. Like you do your things and you have a
Yeah,
unique
I
take.
don't follow all that. I'm sure all of it makes sense and stuff, but I don't actually
Right.
give a shit.
And this is why I want to ask you a question because this is legit. Like you're like Switzerland when it comes to this. Like you're neutral. So
Yeah.
what is your take on what's going on now with this modern dating dynamic with you know the
Oh, okay,
hypergamy kind of
menopause.
thing and all that kind of stuff, and then I'll read this and then I'll get your answer. Doug, the wall was originally meant for menopause
No, he's just telling
and
me,
now
so
the age
no,
of
I
yeah.
get it. Yeah. Okay.
So and thanks for that, brother Doug. So Rook, what's your take on modern dating right now? Because I mean we've talked about what's going on with online dating. We see how women are aggressive and who they are pursuing with the alpha thing. You and I talked about Rollo Tomasi's statement, the alpha seed beta need thing. What's your take on all this, bro?
On the dating world,
Yeah.
well, I have nothing to do with it, but from what I've seen, it's it's a really weird shopping list of unicorn items, that I see out there. People are putting lists of what they want, certain height, certain physique, got to make a certain amount of money, this and that. But then, they're putting these shopping lists out there. But then, what do they bring to the table? It's this weird, really weird uh, combination of wants and wants and wants, but then nothing on the other end. So,
And
but
you're
I
talking
mean,
about both sides. You're talking about men and women are both doing this.
no, I see most. I hate to say it. I don't want to sound chauvinistic, but I see it mostly with women actually on those dating apps. They're the ones with the laundry list. But I don't look at men's profiles, so I wouldn't know. Maybe they have them too. You know what I mean? So I can only tell you from what I've seen. And that's only be on one side of the. I'm not on there flipping through Joe and Jim and whatever. But from what I saw when I was on a dating app was that a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them pretty much was like, uh, you know, I won't date under 6 foot. I'm 6'4", 6'5" in shoes, but I look at that and I'm just like immediate red flag for me if I saw something like that, because that just is a superficial thing, or I didn't see this as much, but I'm sure it's out there. Was like certain income levels and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Six
uh,
figures. 6 figures is a thing.
but the other stuff was fine. Like I need someone that can make me laugh. Okay, that's cool. But once you start listing financial requirements and height requirements and physique and must work out or this, that, and the other, then it starts to look real cringy.
All right. All right.
But you know what? Nobody should be online dating anyway. The online dating thing is a big joke and a mess. I think I'm old school. I think the only way is organically meet somebody because then you can see who they really are. People can't hide who they are for long, especially if you're highly intuitive. You could read through it, all the BS within the first 5 minutes of talking with someone and know if you want to pursue it in one way or another.
Right.
That's up to you. But yeah, the whole thing has really kind of gotten extraordinarily superficial and messy, and I think social media has a lot to do with that because it perpetuates this mindset that everybody needs to be rich, tall, and famous. That's why people are so. I saw profiles on a dating app that said things like, "I'm not on here that much, so you'll have to add me on Instagram," and I'm like, you can't move your finger 5 millimeters to the left and click that other app. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so that just tells me you're on there to build your audience on Instagram, but that's an insecurity to have to need to post selfies every day or this, that, and the other, and get the likes and stuff to keep your self-confidence going. That should tell people something about themselves that maybe they should deal with. Maybe instead of being on these apps, they should get out in the world and start experiencing things and learn about themselves so that when they do walk into a room, they have a different aura about them that sets them apart from everyone else. It doesn't have anything to do with the cologne or perfume or hairstyle or clothing or any of that stuff you're wearing. You've seen me walk up in spots wearing blue jeans and a Target t-shirt, which is like my whole closet. And it's never been a problem. So Uh, but yeah, you know what? I'm glad I'm out of that whole dating world. You know, I'm just I'm happy doing my own thing. You know,
That's
so
what's up, bro. So, and I'll say this, I'm gonna give you the last word here in a second, Rook. But I wanted to thank you personally, brother, for doing me another solid coming on here and help
yeah,
educate me and hopefully educate those who will listen. Um, I love history. You know, my focus is on modern warfare. That's my thing. Man, I love the politics behind it, and you know, from World War I to now, I'm really knowledgeable on a lot that has gone on. But before that, I'm real vague. So thank you so much for coming on and teach me about
yeah,
my people, the Nubians. You know what I mean?
hmm
Which are the Egyptians? Which are the Nubians? Which are hand in hand? Which I did not
yeah.
know. And then I wanted to give you the last word, brother. What are your thoughts on lost history? What does that do to us as a society? Because, like you said, with the lakes that were flooded, the lands, there's certain things we'll probably never know about ancient Egypt that we could benefit from. What are your thoughts on that? And and how can we maybe encourage people, especially now when everything is right here on our phone? Everything is right here. What can we do to encourage people to take an interest in history? And I'll give you the last word.
Well, you know, that really is up to them, to the individual. Um, the first thing is if you really want to learn about, I would start with your own culture or whoever you associate with. Start with that because that's where you're going to naturally have the most interest. I don't feel like I don't really, I'm mixed. So I don't really associate with any culture. So I've always been fascinated by all cultures. And so I just, you know, read about them as much as I can for decades now, and I find it very enriching. And that's kind of what inspired me to start traveling the world. You know, 30 years ago now. It's crazy. You know, so I've seen a lot of places. I've met a lot of other cultures. I've immersed myself. I've done all these things, and I feel like I would not be the man I am today if I hadn't taken that first initial step of just trying to find out a little bit about history, ancient history for me. But this could include any chronology that someone might be interested in. Because what it does is it opens up the door to a whole lot of other pathways that you may not see right now. It's kind of like, you know, when you open a door, you don't realize there's like a bunch of other doors behind it until you open the first door. And now you have all these other options and all these other paths that you can take that you would have never known about had you not taken that first step. And I think learning about ancient history is critical to that because you're not only going to learn about yourself and your ancestors, but as you expand, you're going to learn about human ancestry and human culture. And you're going to start to see a lot of patterns. We talked about earlier about how uh, relationships back in ancient Egypt were no different than they were today. I mean, they were different in a lot of ways, obviously, but there's a lot of similarities there. The core things were the same. And now you're starting to learn about that. Wow, you know what? Humans think the same in general. We have we have a lot of the same pains. We have a lot of the same hopes. With a lot of the same aspirations. All this, and as you start to realize that, you start to feel more like a global citizen, and the world really opens up to you and everything in it, all the knowledge that's available out there. And now you're no longer worried about uh, what label you should fit into or how to impress a certain person of the opposite sex or same sex if you're into that. And now you're thinking on a whole nother plane completely, where all that stuff really doesn't bother you. And now you'll also find though that when you do enter crowds like that, that they recognize that hey, this does not apply to this individual. There's something different about him or her, and everyone's going to be interested, and not everyone. The narcissist won't, but there's going to be a lot of people that are going to find you intriguing and mysterious and all that, you know, that kind of stuff. Not to romanticize it, but it is an axiom that I've experienced through my past 30 years. Well, 20 years. It took me 10 years to even get to like a certain point. Um, and the point is though none of it is about all that. Really, all of it is about trying to grow as who you are. And now you're like this bastion that's in a sea of chaos of 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 knowledge and hope and understanding and truth, and you have a goal, whether it's to make money in a business or whatever. It doesn't matter. You just have so much worldly knowledge and comfort in your own shoes, who you are, without worrying about if I fit this label or that label or what you know what I mean? Where you can walk into any situation and you just exude this confidence that has no arrogance to it. You're still humble and everything. And now you have your life is so much different and so much better, in my opinion. And so if I can encourage anyone to get into looking into history or stuff, think of this long-term picture that I just gave you, and think of it in that terms. And I think that's maybe the best way I can kind of put that, so that we can have a less polarized society out there. I think it would. I think it really would. And like our earlier comment mentioned, the younger kids should be taught this stuff from a very young age, and I 100% agree with that, because now we can have generations that follow our really faulted generation, who will now have this less polarizing mindset and feel more inclusive as part of human society, a global society, and feel like global citizens.
Man, that's what's up,
Boom.
bro. That's it, man. Well fucking said. I got to get my soundboard hooked up so I can hit one of those buttons. That was a Don DeMarco if I ever heard one. So
I googled that last time we were
did you? Yeah. Don DeMarco, Marco.
Marco.
So listen, brother, thanks again.
Yep.
And I want to thank everyone who rocked out with us today. Doug, Miss Globe Girl, brother Jason, Needs Watchers even popped in here. Ben 10, thank you all for coming in here. Miss AKA Lady, of course. Thank y'all for coming in here and rocking with us for 2 hours, talking about Nubians, talking about the sexual marketplace, talking about how to better yourself. You know what I mean? Talking about Hong Kong Fooey. And listen, do me a favor in the comments, if you have a topic or a historical event or something like that, put it in the comments below. And maybe Rook and I we'll jump on that. You know what I mean? Because like I said, we're gonna try to do this at least once a month when we come on. We're just gonna talk about historic stuff. We're gonna talk about traveling. We're gonna talk about the importance of that on our society as a culture moving forward. So yeah, I'm DL Saint, and over here, this is Rook Angelus. You know what I mean? And this is the DL Saint I Really Want to Know podcast. Thanks for rocking out with me, man. We're gonna talk to y'all later. Peace.